So there's a lot of different pickle recipes out there. Today I'm going to show you one of the simple ones I use for a sweet pickle recipe. It's not your average grocery store sweet pickle recipe. And I'm also going to show you how to use the steam canner, which is a godsend because you don't have to fill up a big water bath canner and wait an hour for it to heat up. The steam canner is the quickest option for things that you want to water bath can. So I'm starting with the cucumbers. My friend Mary Catherine brought me a ton of cucumbers and I'm so grateful to her for that. We didn't plant any cucumbers this year, and so it was just wonderful to have this and get so many jars of pickles out of those cucumbers. So I start with the cucumbers. I'm cutting the ends off. You just don't want those hard pieces in there. And then after I cut them off, I'm gonna wash them really well. Now you could certainly wash them first and then cut them. It's up to you, whatever your preference is, but this particular day I just decided to cut the ends off and wash them off. All right, so a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, pickles, when you have so many of them, they take forever when you cut them up. No, I use my food processor. It makes things 10 times easier, and it does make your pickle a little bit thinner, but I prefer it that way. Thin pickles to me absorb that pickle brine a lot better, and I can eat more of it without feeling like I've eaten a lot of it. I have an ancient food processor and I just run the pickles through there. For this particular recipe, I also have onions and bell peppers. Now, these are really important because this is what gives this pickle recipe its real flavor. And you might be thinking, ew, bell peppers are a little weird in a sweet pickle recipe, but no, it's amazing. So make sure you try it. Now I run those onions and bell peppers through my food processor as well, or you can just cut them really thin. The next step is to create your brine. Now that you have everything cut up, and that literally took me maybe 10 minutes for all of those cucumbers, then you're going to need to make your brine. So first you're gonna start with your base. You're gonna use a 1/4 cup of canning salt or pink Himalayan salt, a cup of sugar, a cup of water, a cup of white vinegar, a 1/2 cup of cider vinegar, 2 tablespoons of mustard seed, which I omitted for this particular recipe, 1 teaspoon of celery seed, a 1/2 teaspoon of whole peppercorns, 12 garlic cloves. Now I omitted the mustard and I quadrupled this recipe. So I had a lot of brine to do a lot of these cucumbers. I did end up having to add a little bit more at the end, but for the most part, quadrupling this recipe was enough for all of those cucumbers. The next step is adding your cucumbers and your onions and peppers to your brine. Now I did this in 2 batches because my pot wasn't big enough. So your cucumbers and onions and peppers will release flavor and water. So if it doesn't look like you have enough brine, you probably will, as long as you don't have as many cucumbers as you do brine. They will release water and shrink a little bit, and then they'll create more of a brine for you to work with. So you just cook it down just for a few minutes. You don't want the cucumbers to really cook that much, but you do want them to get a little bit wilted, and some of them might turn a little bit of a paler green color, and that's fine. Once you get to that color and that consistency, now it's time to fill your jars. Now, I prefer to use pint jars because we can eat a pint jar in a day with my family. Some people prefer to use jelly jars, others prefer to use 1.5 jars. That process of figuring out what you want to do is up to you and what you prefer for your family. I use pint jars, and you simply just put your funnel into your jar, pour your pickles in there, and make sure there's enough brine to basically at least come up to the top of the pickles. They don't have to necessarily cover the pickles, but at least come up to the top of them. And then leave an inch headspace at the top so that you have enough airspace for the pickles to process in the steam canner. Now, once you have your jars filled, just wipe the rim and put the top on a fingertip strength. You don't want to really wrench it on there. Just tighten it just a little bit with your fingertips, and that's all you need. Now, the steam canner, as I was talking about before, is very, very efficient. I love my steam canner. I rarely ever use my water bath canner anymore because the steam canner is just so much easier to work with. So the first step with the steam canner is filling the base full of water. When you get a steam canner, essentially you'll come in a few different parts. You'll have to put the little timer on top on there. It's not a timer, it's more of a gauge for altitude. But that's really the only thing you have to do when it comes to you. So you start by putting the rack in the bottom of the steam canner, and then you fill the steam canner bottom up just enough to where it touches the bottom of that rack. Place it back on your stove, and you can turn the heat on almost immediately. I like to put mine on the highest, almost boiling setting that I can get if my jars are ready to be put in there. Then I place my jars in there, I put the lid on, and I wait until my setting on top gets to where it's supposed to be. Now there's 3 different zone settings on the top of your steam canner, and it is all related to your altitude. Now I'm in zone 1 because I don't have a high altitude here. Even though I live in the mountains, I'm down on the slope of a mountainside, and so I'm only about 400 feet above sea level. So my zone is zone 1, and it comes up to heat very quickly. But read the instructions on your steam canner. Basically, once the steam reaches that zone on top, that's when you start counting down. You adjust the heat down to a more of a medium-low setting, and you let it go. So for these particular pickles and them being in pint jars, I only process them for 15 minutes. You can go as much as 20 minutes, but in my experience, the 15 minutes is just fine for me. Now, once you are done with that processing time, make sure that when you lift the lid up, you lift it away from you, because steam will come out of the canner when you lift the lid up. Some people prefer to let the steam release on its own and just let the canner set, almost like a pressure canner. But for me, it's fine. As long as you lift the lid very carefully and put it over to the side, you should be just fine. And this way it allows me more time to get more cans in the steam canner and go on a roll. Now, I do turn the heat down to a low setting. When I take the jars out, I put new jars in and immediately crank it up to boil, wait for it to hit my zone, and then I start the process all over again. Once you take your jars out of the canner, one thing you really need to remember is to not set it down on a cool tabletop or countertop. Now, jars can break when they hit a surface that is a lot cooler than what the jar temperature is. So I like to put mine on towels or cookie sheets or something cardboard where they're not hitting a very cold surface. It's also important to keep in mind that that jar is hot, and it can ruin countertops and tabletops when it comes into direct contact with those items. So just keep that in mind as well. These pickles taste amazing, and they're just that easy. I did this entire batch in about 2 hours, and that was only because I had a toddler running around and an 11-year-old screaming at him and all of the other home life family things that happen. But I was able to get 24 jars of pickles out of this batch, and you would get a little bit less than that if you were just doing the cucumbers, but the onions and the peppers help set it off and really stretch it. This recipe is one of my favorites. It's absolutely delicious, and I hope that you will try it. Find more information about this recipe in the description of this video. Check me out at thefuelhomestead.com for more recipes and homesteading inspiration, where we encourage simple living through purposeful work. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider it. And until next time, have a great day and happy homesteading.